Thank you, Lindsay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Stanger, and I'm a member of Temple Sinai. On behalf of Judy Schwartz, Donna Goldberg, and Sharon Silvio, AKA my small but mighty committee, we welcome you. First, a couple of housekeeping details. Please be sure you are muted now. During the presentation, the chat will be turned off. It'll be open towards the end of the talk, at which time you may put your questions and comments into the chat. However, if you are comfortable, we'd like to encourage you to raise your hand and wait to be asked to unmute. Because we want to get as many questions as possible, please be direct with the question you have for our speaker. 1 year ago, during a Bill Maher interview with author Michael Eric Dyson, Maher asserted on the topic of police accountability, Maher asserted there were never any repercussions, but now there are. Well, a few more. It's not a tsunami, Dyson said, to which Maher replied, it used to be none. Dyson responds, no doubt, that's progress, but Malcolm X said, you can't put the knife in my back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches, and call that progress. Dyson continues, I'm acknowledging there's been progress, but do you know the overwhelming majority of Black people live in fear of the police? That's a reality I think many white people hadn't seen until these snuff films. And these films show us that no matter what, hands up, get shot. Hands down, get shot. Speak to the police in a saucy way, shot. Don't say anything at all, get shot. Mm-hmm. No matter what we do, the crime is not what we do, it's who we are. And that's the reality that we have to confront when it comes to police brutality, he concluded. When planning this series, we understood that police accountability would be a critical issue for us to grasp. We are so pleased that Conor Dwyer Reynolds, Executive Director of the Police Accountability Board, is with us tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy Schwartz to introduce him.
Thank you, Susan. Tonight is the third presentation in our series, Perspectives on Policing, Past, Present, and Future. Tonight, we're going to learn all about the Police Accountability Board, but first a few words about its director. The Police Accountability Board, or the PAB, unanimously selected Conor Dwyer Reynolds from 150 candidates as its first executive director on October 16, 2020, and Conor's appointment was confirmed by Rochester City Council 1 month later. Conor graduated from the U of R and Yale Law School and is eminently qualified to lead the PAB. Shawnee Wilson, the board chair, stated on October 17th, the day after, quote, during our search for our executive director, Conor stood out as singularly prepared and skilled to step into this position. His leadership background in law, research, and teaching, in addition to his experience getting new ventures off the ground, highlight critical skill sets. This, combined with his passion for social justice, his proven ability to work with individuals and communities across lines of race, gender, ability, and socioeconomic conditions, and his commitment to our particular work, makes him a candidate unlike any other. Conor comes highly and enthusiastically recommended from staff who have reported to him, colleagues and community advocates who have worked alongside him, and those who have hired to work for them. His selection is a milestone in our establishment of the Rochester Police Accountability Board as a national leader in reimagining public safety. I believe that with Conor's leadership, we will be able to do just that, end quote. Conor expressed, quote, I'm looking forward to working with the board to execute their vision of reimagining public safety in partnership with this community. If given time and the right financial resources, there is no question that the board has the expertise and power to help create an accountable public safety system, a system that reflects the priorities of all our people, including Black and Brown people, women, people with disabilities, unhoused people, people who disproportionately face poverty, police officers, and our LGBTQ community, especially our Black trans community that constantly suffers exclusion and violence, end quote. What more could I possibly say except please help me welcome Conor Dwyer Reynolds. Conor, the floor is yours.
Wow. It's been a while since I heard those words. It's good to hear. So it's good to be with all of you. I'm sure I've been very close to all of you, running through the forests of Corbett's Glen, where I grew up. I'm sure you all driven down a little further on Old Penfield Road, maybe crossed Alamo Drive. I grew up on 99. So I'm very, very familiar with, and very, very, very familiar with Sinai. So it's wonderful to be with all of you. It's, I was saying before to Judy, this job is all consuming. But one of my favorite parts of it is being able to speak with community members, because at the end of the day, PAB is built on the idea that it is the community that creates change at the end of the day, rather than any government agency or political appointee or someone like me. And so making sure that our community is engaged and educated in our work is a top priority of ours. And so I'm so happy to be here doing this. I'm also happy that I'm hiring a bunch of staff who are going to be doing this for me in the very near future, people who are much better at this kind of thing. But I'm more than happy to be with all of you tonight. And, I want to be as brief as I can, because I know you have many questions about police reform in Rochester, the possibilities for real change, what the last year has meant for that seed of hope that seemed to have been planted in 2020, and where you think you see the city going. I want to hear a little bit of that too. But I really want to come across with one clear message tonight, and that is that Rochester's Police Accountability Board is a unique and exceptionally powerful tool for creating real and fundamental change in Rochester's public safety system. And that whatever else is going on, I'm sure you've heard maybe the PAB is toothless, the PAB can't do anything. Why did the PAB get $5 million? What the PAB is going to do with that? I'm happy to answer all those questions and hopefully reassure you that yes, the ship is sailing and we are going somewhere that is unprecedented and hopefully going to bring the kind of change our community's been demanding for generations. So I'm going to do a few things tonight. I'm going to leave you with some facts that will hopefully shape your perspectives on PAB. But again, I'm going to be exceptionally brief. So give me 1 second to just share my screen and do an exceptionally brief PowerPoint presentation. In the meantime, I just want to do a time check. We have until 8 o'clock. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
phenomenal.
we could go a little longer, but that's the goal.
Okay, good. All righty. So let me just go here. Okay. Okay, folks can see me. Judy, give me a thumbs up if you can see that. All right, good. So how do we get to a police accountability board? Generations of police reform activism in Rochester. Yes, PAB was officially created in 2020, but it's been since at least the 1950s that Rochesterians, led by Black and Brown residents, have fought for community control within our public safety system. So this thing has been many decades in the making. More specifically, there have been 4 years of activism around the Police Accountability Board, this idea of a new, independent, powerful, community-led oversight agency to help restructure and change our policing system. We got here because a coalition of community groups, many of which I know you folks were involved in, whether it's UCLM or Vocal New York, many local organizations and branches of organizations and churches and synagogues and community organizations came together to fight to create this new powerful institution. And that battle led to the drafting of a piece of legislation to change the city charter, Rochester's little constitution. And so this law that created our agency, this new part of city government, was written by activists. And that's very unusual for a piece of legislation at any level to be written by people who are directly affected by the work. You know, I'm a lawyer by trade, and if I learned anything in law school, it's that so much of law is written not by people who it affects, right? And so it's hard to have to, you know, we often enshrine and uphold and almost fetishize laws in the United States just because they are laws, right? But I think a lot of people in this community have a real fidelity to this law, the PAB ordinance. The PAB is part of the city charter because it truly was drafted by the community. And it shows up in how powerful and powerful the legislation is and how some of its unique features. And it wasn't just written by Rochesterians, it had to be approved of by Rochester's voters in 2019 via referendum. And during that vote, an overwhelming majority of people who voted on the initiative voted in favor of it. So PAB was created in a whole bunch of different ways by this community. And you can't say that of so many different police reform initiatives that have happened across the United States. So many of them are, to use a lack of a better word, you know, created by the status quo. And PAB was not. And that makes us unique in itself, but it also has some very important consequences. So the core mission of PAB, as it is stated in that city charter, is to ensure public accountability and transparency over the powers exercised by the sworn officers of the Rochester Police Department. Today, I was in a training session with some of our new staff attorneys, and we spent a good 30 minutes talking about just these words and what it means. And we could spend a whole night talking about it. But what I'll say here is that this is an exceptionally broad mission, right? When we often think about police reform, police accountability, public safety reimagination, we can think about things like rebuilding community trust. You know, we can think about things like improving police community relations. And those are good goals. But at bottom, what they often imply is that we need to work with the existing system. We need to build trust in that system. We need to improve its image. And what this mission about is something different. It's something a little bit broader than that. It's about this idea that we want the system, not the system as it exists, but the powers within that system to be open to transparency, to be made clear to the public how these powers are being used for better or worse, their costs and benefits, but then to make it accountable, to make that level of power in line with responsibility, right? Because that might be a fundamental break in our policing system, is that we give this part of local government immense power. We put immense power in its hands, the power to arrest, to detain, to use violence. But there isn't that level of responsibility there. There isn't that level of responsibility. And accountability is making sure that that power and responsibility line up in one way or another. And so this is a broad mission. It's a mission that really is about reimagining public safety. You know, that term came into the true public lexicon in 2020. This was written in 2019. I'm certain that if it had been written in 2020, it would just say reimagining public safety, because that's what this gets. This gets at the big picture. It gets at power. It gets at systems. It sees the idea as beyond individual issues, right? It's not, in the words of Chair Shani Wilson, she's the chair of the Police Accountability Board. She's my boss. In her words, it's not about bad apples. It's about a sick tree. It's about a sick tree. And so that's what this is about. PAB, it is, you know, in its mission, it is looking at the big picture rather than narrowly focusing on the acts of individuals. So what are the tasks? What is it that PAB does to achieve this big picture mission? Well, first, we independently investigate allegations of officer wrongdoing. What does this mean? In the current system, the police investigate themselves. Their internal affairs unit, you know, anytime someone, you know, states a complaint, anytime police become aware of wrongdoing, whether it's, you know, someone says that they got beat up by a police officer inappropriately, someone says that a police officer sexually harassed a fellow employee. All of that is investigated by the police themselves. PAB is supposed to create an independent system where non-police officers, community members, independently investigate. So our own process of gathering the facts, coming to conclusions, and stating what should happen is done separate from the police department so that the community can trust what those facts are and what should be done, right? So that's one big thing we do. And another thing we're supposed to do is create systemic change and transparency in RPD. We're supposed to look at all the policies, practices, procedures, trainings, and say what's actually going on in our policing system. You know, a defining feature of police departments across the country is that they're a black box. We don't know what's going on inside them. We don't know how they're making policy, how they're choosing to do X, Y, or Z. And then our final mission here is to engage and educate the community about the costs and benefits of policing. We're trying to learn what the community wants so that we can translate that into new policies, practices, and procedures. The other thing I'll emphasize here is that this, you know, people often think, well, wait a second, what about this lawsuit? PAB currently doesn't have powers, right? Well, the power that we don't have is to discipline officers. What does that mean? To directly impose consequences on police officers if we find that they've committed wrongdoing. Now, that just affects our ability to impose the consequences. It doesn't affect our ability to investigate, find out the facts, release those facts to the public, and then push for consequences, right? And those consequences don't have to be things like just firing or anything like that. I want to make very clear, this board isn't interested in mere punitive consequences, right? We're interested in restoration. We're interested in transformation. And so in this board, either making recommendations about what should happen, or if we get our full powers back in being able to impose those consequences, we're focused on real change, system change, not just the status quo if we just punish people and that's how we address problems. We want to look at the roots and see if we can address those issues and restore relationships, build relationships, and transform systems. Okay, that is our goal. That is the mission of the Police Accountability Board. That's not anti-police, that's pro-community. That's what that's about. So, you know, you can have a big picture mission, you can have concrete tasks that the law says you're supposed to do. But when it comes to police oversight and police accountability and police reform, if there's one thing we've seen is people have lofty goals and great missions. And if you aren't given the power or resources to do it, you're not getting anywhere. So why should we believe that PAB's got a fighting shot? Well, first and foremost, we got a budget. We got a budget. Police Accountability Board's initial budget was about $250,000. That was enough to hire me and hire a few people, investigators getting paid about $45,000. Okay. That was our initial budget to oversee a police department of about 700 and plus people, sworn officers plus another 150 administrative. Anyone think that that's enough resources to get that done? No. When I interviewed for this position, I said, look, you have remarkable powers, right? But the only way you're going to get this done is with actual staff. This thing is set up to fail. You know, you can do the calculations about, you know, what it takes to do the work. And you needed 50 or so staff to do all the things that the law says we're supposed to do in the timelines the law says we're supposed to do it. And so, you know, that was our almost number one priority after, you know, I came on board, was fighting for a budget that made sense. And, you know, the same community organizations and leaders who, you know, stepped up to support our creation fought for a budget that worked. And we got you've seen the $5 million budget we got. That is the largest budget as a percentage of the police department's budget. So that's about 5.5% of Rochester RPD's budget. As a percentage of a police department's budget, that's the best funded police oversight agency in the history of the United States. It might be in the history of the world. We don't know. I only know the stats on the United States. But the best in the United States is somewhere around 1.5 to 2%. That's in Oakland and Chicago. We blow them out of the water, right? Blow them out of the water. If you tell that statistic to anyone who's worked in police oversight, their jaws will drop. They'll go, they don't know what to do with themselves, right? It's a huge victory. I can't emphasize how remarkable that fact alone is. So that's a real, when you have the staff and you're able to have the resources to hire expert staff too. I mean, that's an incredible thing because so many agencies like the PAB fail because they're political band-aids that are never given the resources. They can't do investigations appropriately, so they are properly criticized for doing slapdash investigations. You lose trust, the thing gets cut, and it's all over, right? Having a budget is an incredible, important, but not sufficient alone step to doing the work. You have to have legal power to do the work, and we do. So unlike any other police oversight agency in the country, the law says that PAB has to have direct access to any source of information it wants. Anything. Emails, body-worn camera footage, police databases, reports, files, records, individual testimony, anything. The law says PAB has to have it. That on its own is remarkable. Again, police departments are black boxes. We often don't know what goes on inside of them. The PAB has the power to see anything, everything. Policies, practices, procedures. It's remarkable. This is the power to actually make policing in Rochester transparent. And that alone is a super weapon. Because if what we know that you know, sunlight's the best disinfectant, sunshine's almost never been inside a police department. PAB has the power to do it. We have the ability to draft reform legislation, actually have experts work with the community and take that community preference, build it into legislation that's durable, can survive legal challenge, and get it passed. Right? It's a powerful, powerful tool. Rather than just proposing you know, working like a committee and coming up with proposals and just having bullet points issued to the community, coming up with actual legislation that can be passed. Powerful tool for change. Finally, the power to hold oversight hearings. I know many of you probably watch CNN and are good politically astute. I'm sure you've seen, you know, people, whether it's Katie Porter, AOC, these kind of people, you know, getting answers from elected officials who are in power, and that being a powerful tool for seeing truth, for understanding what's going on in government. PAB has the power to do that too. PAB held its first oversight hearing last year. We had the police chief come before our board and she was asked questions for 2 hours. It's the first time anything like that's ever happened in the history of Rochester. We had over 3,000 views. It was, I think, the most watched government agency hearing in Rochester's history, I think, or at least in its modern years. I don't have all the 1970s data, but it was big. These are an immense array of powers to bring transparency. And again, these are all the powers we currently have. Don't worry about that lawsuit about our disciplinary powers, right? These are the powers to get so much work done. And so that's just kind of the first little slideshow I wanted to show you. I wanted to show you a little bit about, you know, I told you about the PAB. Now I want to tell you about policing in Rochester. Uh-oh, that's not the, hold on a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and reshare because the image has gone out. Give me a second here. Okay, let's see if this works. So I've shown you some facts about the Police Accountability Board. Now I want to show you some facts about policing in Rochester. Okay, I talked earlier about where PAB has come from, generations of activism. These are just some newspaper clippings from the years. You know, we often think about 2020 being this unique moment in Rochester's history. We've actually been here every single generation. Every single generation, something like a Daniel Prude death has happened. Every single generation, there's been an organization like UCLM, Free the People, to come together to demand change. Every single generation, there's been a PAB-like entity that was created. Back in 1960, in the 1960s, there was an original PAB, the Police Advisory Board, that was created, right? Rochester was the second city in the country to have a police oversight agency, right? We've been here before. That thing failed. So has its predecessors. We've gotten a little bit better. The Civilian Review Board was a little bit better, but that ended up being rejected by the community too. Rochester's been an innovator when it comes to policing. We were the first police department in New York State to have a social worker. When? 1913. 1913. That's right. That's right. Rochester, this whole, we should have, social worker as part of policing. It's been around for 100 years. No new idea. By the way, that was our first policewoman. That was the real role of policewoman initially, was to be social workers in the police departments. We can have a whole nother conversation about that later. Point is, we've been here before. And Rochester is unique in many ways. So this is a bar chart. You might have to minimize or move the Zoom pieces around to see all this. This is a chart. What it shows, each one of these lines, each one of those blue lines, that represents that represents a city. Each line is a city. All of the lines, there's 75 of them. Those are the 75 cities closest to Rochester in population size, okay? The height of each bar represents how policed that city is in terms of officers per 10,000 residents. The bar on the farthest right of the chart is a city with less than 10 officers per 10,000 people. The bar on the farthest left of your screen is the city that has over 40 officers per 10,000 people, okay? So cities on the right are more policed, cities on the left are more policed, cities on the right are less policed, okay? So guess which of these bars is Rochester? I'll give you a second. You don't have to, shout it out, but pick one in your head. Pick one. You got it?
Yep.
Did you pick that one? Because that's it.
Yep.
That's it. It's the second one. You know what's the only city of our size in the United States that beats us? Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama. Now, I'm sure you're all trying to think about why that's the case. I'm sure you're all thinking about why. But before you do, remember, we are twice as policed as the average city our size. Twice as policed. Even when you take into account things like crime rates, demographics, or geography. Try and say, well, it's a Northeast thing. Well, it's a Rust Belt thing. Well, we have a high crime rate. Even when you adjust for these factors, we are significantly more policed than similar cities. Something special in Rochester. And I don't have the full answer why, but I do know one answer what it's not. It's not because of Rust Belt infrastructure overhang, okay? And I'll explain why in a minute, but even in the concept of Monroe County, Rochester's 3 times more policed than Brighton, Gates, or Greece, and we're 5 times more policed than Webster. In 1950, there were 430 officers for 330,000 people in Rochester, okay? Back during our peak population in 1950. Today, we have more officers for way less people. What does this add up to? We're more than twice as policed as we were 70 years ago. Now, I know you can start thinking about what's changed in the city of Rochester between those times. So you can maybe start thinking about why all this is. According to publicly available data, what does the average RPD officer get paid? Average, include from the chief all the way down to the most recent recruits. Get a number in your mind. And this is from See Through New York, and it does not include, as far as I know, does not include overtime pay. 50, 60,000, 70? How about 100? Okay. So we have, I don't know if you've heard of broken windows policing. Okay, it's this idea that if you enforce low-level violations, you will reduce major crime like murder. It's a policy, right? Is a choice to do this. This is a choice to do this kind of policing. It happens here in Rochester. So broken windows policing will often target things like not having a bell on your bike. Because that is a violation, right? Not having a bell on your bike. Does that get enforced in Brighton or Webster? I graduated from Penfield High School. I regularly rode on a bike without more than just a bell, not a helmet or anything else. I would ride it with another guy on my back too. I never got arrested for that. But if you're in the city of Rochester and you were biking without a bell in 2020, yep, you can get arrested. And who got arrested? Almost all of them were Black and brown people. Now, if your son or daughter was arrested for not having a bell on your bike, what would you do? So Another question that often comes up is, does the Rochester Police Department reflect the community that is responsible for protecting? Okay, so these are just some comparative statistics. Rochesterians as a population, 52% are non-white. Rochester is to use an academic term, a majority minority city. What percentage of Rochester Police Department officers are non-white? 13%. 1 in 5 Rochesterians is identified as Hispanic in census demographics. Normally I'd use Latinx or Latino here, but these are the numbers, so we got to say Hispanic here. Officers, just 11%. More than half of Rochesterians identify as women, just 13% of Rochester police officers do. Obviously, everyone in the city of Rochester lives in the city. 6% of RPD officers do. 6%. It's one of the highest non-resident rates of any police department in the country. Right? Okay. So those are some facts about Rochester policing. Now I've told you about PAB, and I've told you about those facts. Why did I tell you those facts? Well, I told you them first because I hope you understand that there's a lot going on in RPD, a lot of things that make you ask some questions, right? I know you've had the chance to meet with some of our amazing police officers. Moses Robinson's one of my favorite people in the world. I love Moses. We have a great group of people who work for RPD. I believe that the vast majority of people who go to work for RPD choose that job because they want to protect people, right? That's why they're there, okay? And that's a good thing, right? I also believe that there's a special subpopulation of RPD officers who are from the city and who particularly have a devotion to keeping their own community safe. And those people, given all of the barriers standing in their way, you got to really, really support and appreciate what they're trying to do. I think that these numbers and statistics that I've told you, they don't have an individual face behind them. They aren't the result of an individual officer's choice. They're the result of systems, policies, practices, and procedures. Okay? These are systemic issues in our police department. And it's the Police Accountability Board's job to figure out what's going on and figure out some solutions by working together with our community members and trying to get police officers involved as well. Okay? But here's why I showed you those facts. Why is it that these facts are only becoming known to you now? You've all lived in and around Rochester for years. Why are these things new? Well, I'm going to be honest, it's because the Police Accountability Board has put all these facts and figures together. We did them during the Rochester's Police Reform Initiative back in late 2020, early 2021. And that was when we had a staff of 1. That's me. That's where those facts and figures come from. Okay. PAB is hiring 50 people. Imagine what we're going to be able to do. So with that, again, I wanted to open up time for questions. We've got about 25 minutes left. I'm happy to stay as long as the questions are here. Again, I want to thank Judy so much for getting this together. Judy was one of the first people to email me on the job, and had some great things. We had a great back and forth then, and I knew that I'd be getting a follow up from her at some point. So really, I'm just so happy to be here. So happy to answer your questions. I know there's so much to talk about, so I'll open the floor up to all of you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I know that there are probably a lot of questions. Lindsay, the chat should be opened and folks can put their questions in. You can also raise your hand. I'm going to start with something that we've been talking about in this committee, and how does the police union impact your goal of creating change?
Mike Mazzio and I text back and forth. And Mike and I think it's important to be able to talk to anybody, police chief, police union, whoever. It's an open door. This is something, Steve, anyone who's worked with Reverend Stewart, I've adopted his approach. I'm willing to talk to anybody. I don't think, I'm realistic. The police union and its leadership, their role is to, and literally their legal duty is to protect the interests of their officers. right? That's their job. Their job is not to create a better public safety system, right? Even if you have good-natured people in there, that's not their mission, right? They have a legal duty to protect their officers, okay? And I think you have to just always keep that in mind, right? And you know, the Rochester Police Locust Club is the most powerful political force in the county, right? I don't think that I think that's, you know, might be sheepish. Mike Mazzeo is very good at his job. The last time that the Rochester Police Locust Club was politically challenged, this was back in the 1970s when city council actually fought over police pay regularly. The Locust Club took out TV ads calling out individual council members. They took out an ad in the Democrat and Chronicle showing city council members forcing police officers to walk the plank. The ad listed the home telephone numbers of every city council member. So, you know, since that era of the 70s, there really hasn't been much resistance to the police union. You know, they won. You know, they actually, you know, back in the 70s, after they gained bargaining power, they committed an illegal strike and shut down the city. And within 24 hours, the city leadership came and gave them everything they wanted in terms of pay increases. The police union is exceptionally powerful. And the fact that they haven't had to flex their muscles in a while is a sign of what they think the odds of fundamental reform are. And so all I'll say is that, you know, I'm always willing to talk to Mike. I've said from the beginning, we need the expertise and perspective of officers to find out what the real solutions are. But we have to be realistic about, you know, where change can come from. And when it comes to working with people who've benefited from the existing system, you know, we have to keep our eyes open and not let obstruction get in the way of progress. And I want to be very clear here. The police union itself is not the same as police officers. My ultimate commitment is to work with police officers who are committed to change and good. And there are lots of those people. And there are also police officers who don't necessarily think the union represents their best interests. And in most cities, the officers who will say that are Black and brown officers. It's a very common thing. It's why Noble exists, for example, a professional organization just dedicated to the interests of Black and brown officers. Those are the officers who have consistently through the years been on the front lines fighting for real change. And, you know, that's not to say that it's only Black and brown officers who want change, but it is to say that the PAB needs allies across the spectrum, and we want to work with everyone, especially those officers. And what we're not going to let is politics get in the way of those very important relationships.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Barbara, you want to unmute?
Yeah, so you mentioned one policy that maybe could be re-examined, which is the broken windows and giving people tickets for their bicycle bills. And I'm sure that there's lots of others, like how many social workers the department uses and how they use them. So how do you go about starting the process of examining those policies and I mean, rethinking them from the ground up, right? They're not based on data, and I'm not sure who actually makes them. So like, it's a big deal. So how will you go about that?
Barbara, you hit on it. It's about evidence-based policing. Now, I'm serious. This is my mantra. We just want policies that work. We want to know what the community wants, and then we want policies that can make sure that that happens. You want evidence, evidence-based policing. Seems very basic, but it's actually a very controversial concept. Very controversial concept. So before coming to work in this role, I taught administrative law. A lot of at the heart of administrative law is how government agencies operate. And most government agencies operate using this idea called cost-benefit analysis. It's the idea that government policies should have their benefits outweigh their costs, right? And in doing policy making, you explicitly take into account what the costs are and the benefits are. And you think expansively about this, right? This is a concept that is almost entirely foreign from police policymaking. The vast majority of police policymaking is based on what has happened in the past and understandings of the benefits as opposed to the costs. Okay. So that's just a little bit of background to say where I would love for the policies to go in general. And oftentimes when we calculate costs and benefits, we aren't actually talking to the people for whom those costs are imposed on, right? For example, incarcerated people, Black and brown people, we exclude them from discussions of what count as cost and benefits, right? So that's just one thing I want to say. But in terms of where to start, if you're thinking about getting to a place where it's evidence-based policing, you want to start with the facts. Like I said, policing is a black box. How does policymaking happen in the police department? How do they use their budget? How do they get their budget? How do they decide? Where are police officers going every day? What are they being trained on? There's so many different places to start. And what PAB wants to do is work with the community to understand what are the most pressing issues. And let's start by looking there, right? But really the first thing we have to do is take a look and see what's going on inside the police department. So right now, what PAB is doing is getting a sense of all of the sources of information. What are the databases? What are the policies? Where is the information stored? How does the department operate? Having that basic sense of this thing as a living, breathing organization of 1,000 people, that's where you have to start, right? Otherwise, you're just swimming in the dark. I can't tell you how rudimentary and basic this stuff is, but because there's never been public accountability in the Rochester Police Department, you have to start from the mere basics. Really, it's like learning the alphabet. That's how basic this stuff is, Barbara. But you have to start there because otherwise, the vast majority of police reform happens, people don't even open that door, right? And so you're coming up with policies, practices, and procedures that don't look on the inside. And it's unsurprising that those policies, practices, and procedures don't work. So I'm sorry, that might not be the most concrete answer you wanted, but I hope it communicates really where we're at when it comes to Rochester and police reform.
Sharon, do you want to read a couple of things from the chat? You have to unmute.
Okay, basically, Rabbi Katz and let me see where we are here. And John Thomas had a very similar question, which about that. And Jill Stanger's question is, with the additional 50 people coming on board, what specifically will you be working on? Nice question, Jill.
So, you know, my job as executive director has been to help the board build as it does. And that's meant, you know, in recent times, juggling all sorts of hats, being a hiring manager, being a policy creator, being a presenter, all these things. And so what my primary job has been in recent days is finding the people who are qualified, local, diverse folks who I can hire and delegate these tasks to. So the vast majority of what we'll be doing is hiring and doing policy making, right? Creating the rules by which PAB will do its work is exceptionally important, right? Because this is some of the most sensitive stuff that we're dealing with, internal police records, which gets to a little bit of John Thomas's question. So what are we doing? Specifically, we're working with the city and the police department to build a set of rules that allows our investigators to do their work. At the same time, we're hopefully getting new office space to put all these 50 people in. We are building out community engagement procedures by which the community will know how to come and give us information, to work with us, to file complaints, etc. We're building a language access program. We're looking to build the best possible way of making sure all of our work is accessible to people in the deaf and hard of hearing community and the limited English proficiency community to make sure all Rochesterians can interact with us. Building out that public affairs unit, like I said, building out our investigations unit, building out our policy unit so that we have really skilled lawyers and policy analysts to look at the big picture, hiring investigative journalists to do the work of diving into some of this stuff too and being able to present it in an effective way, hiring ops people. So really, again, the work is rudimentary right now, but the idea is by spring, sometime around April or May, open those doors, open those literal doors and allow people to file complaints, work with us, and start investigating big picture issues and individual issues with police officers. So that is just a taste of the work that we're doing, which is to say there's a lot that's going on.
John, I didn't mean to say that you and Sandra had the same question. I'm sorry. But Conor, along with that, can you tell us where you would be moving and how will you advertise for jobs and what would some of the qualifications be?
Sure. We are hoping to move to a building near Parcel 5 that is centrally located right on a bus station with tons of parking.
Right.
We are hoping that the new administration, new city council will move very, very quickly to approve this. We've been working on this since July, and it's long past time. PAB has places to put people. As of Monday, I have no more seats in my current building. Everyone has to work remotely because the city hasn't yet to sign that contract. So I'm really hoping they get there because you can't do the work if you don't have seats to put people in. In terms of how we're hiring, rockpab.org was how we were initially doing all the hiring. We posted 30 jobs at once. I'm going to say in an ideal world, you would not build a $5 million organization with 50 people in the matter of 6 months. I would not generally recommend doing something like that. But this is the political situation that we're in. And so this is how we're doing it. So it's been a wild ride. But we built a whole jobs pipeline working with organizations from the Rochester Black Bar Association to local educational institutions like UB to get the jobs out there, getting them into the right communities to make sure that we had diverse applicant pools. I could speak for a while on the rules and procedures PAB built to recruit and hire diverse talent. I will say we've had a remarkably great success rate there. I was onboarding people Monday. We had 10 people in the room. I was the only person who wasn't a woman of color. The process has been it's been exceptionally hard work to do it. The city is not built to recruit diverse people, I promise you, but we've been working very hard on it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Padme, unmute. Thank you.
So, Conor, I'm wondering about your working with restorative justice and trying to help bring that into the community with the police. My son lives in Longmont, Colorado, and they have an ongoing relationship with family disputes. They bring in a restorative justice community members who have been trained to handle mediation in conflicts, and the police work directly with that arm of the police. They're actually in the main office of the police of Longmont. So I'm just wondering if that's something that's on your list at some point, to have some kind of restorative justice work with the police.
Short answer is yes. Longer answer is this. I'm sure some of you know Rabbi Drora Settle, who is a board member and one of my 9 bosses. Rabbi Settle is exceptionally focused on restorative justice. Rabbi Settle is, I find her to be exceptionally brilliant. And, one of the things she's really been pushing is restorative justice sounds nice, but what does it mean in a concrete context? And what can it mean in the context of real power imbalance? Right? And so, Rochester had a restorative justice process, something that was, it was a reconciliation and conciliation process that was run by the Center for Dispute Settlement. And that's existed for years. And when we were taking over, in terms of police accountability, I remember sitting down with CDS, and I don't want to misquote the numbers for the long term, but I know in 2020, they offered that service to a number of people who filed complaints and no one used it. And you have to have the officer and the person agree. I don't think any complainants wanted to use it. And part of the reason complainants don't often use it is because that's not what they're looking for sometimes. Now, that's not to say, actually, in other places, these procedures, maybe like one in Colorado, do get used. But the point is, it all comes down to the details, right? And what I've seen, and this gets to Leslie's question about other PAB initiatives, what you've seen is really poorly implemented restorative justice principles, right? And so what the board is working through right now is they're trying to create a set of non-binding consequence guidelines. So when the board has found that wrongdoing occurs, the board wants to have a rubric that says, here's what we think should happen. The board wants to incorporate restorative and transformative consequences, right? Things like a personal apology, just saying, yeah, I was wrong. Things like community service to rebuild that. Maybe even things like transferring money from the police department budget to the Department of Recreation and Human Services, right? These are all consequences that don't punish people, but seek to transform systems or restore relationships. The board loves that stuff. And honestly, it's been things that the police union's been begging for forever, education-based discipline, stuff like that, right? This is something that I think is a great idea, in many ways unassailable, but I think you're going to have the status quo bite back about it, because it is about fundamental change and real change rather than just band-aids and cutting around the edges. And some people might be scared of that, but I'll tell you, the board's all about it. And the board knows that we have lots of resources in this community, lots of organizations that have reached out to us, whether it's the Gandhi Institute, other places that want to get this done. So it's clear the community wants it. We got to figure out the right way to do it though.
Yeah, no, it's always been a problem for educating and having the foundational stuff. One good thing is the peace circles that they have in the city schools.
Yeah.
You know, that has begun and that's been working. So that's bringing home some info to the parents also. But thank you. That's really helpful to know that. Thank you.
And can I just follow up on Leslie's question? There's a coalition of groups called the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL. They have an annual conference every year. I was on the keynote this year, and I remember describing PAB's model, and the other people were just, like, oh, wow. Places from Chicago, all these places, big cities saying, wow, PAB can be the model, right? Right now, PAB has consultants helping build this thing, because Lord knows I don't know how to do all of it. Those consultants are the former executive director of New York City's PAB and the chief of investigations for Chicago's PAB and a Harvard law professor. Those are the people who are helping build PAB, as well as community members, right? So this expertise of institutional expertise plus expertise from the community, that's how you build something that really works. And so other models, that's been from the beginning. We've been looking at those things forever. So, we want to build on the successes of the past and frankly learn from what is the vast majority of cases failure.
Thank you. Another question that we have is from Barb Castle, who states, you stated that one of your objectives is to gauge what the community wants. How will you accomplish this?
The easy answer is by hiring local people who know how to do it, right? That's been one of my biggest priorities, is hiring policy staff who know actually to get this data, qualitatively, quantitatively, et cetera. It's going to be a complex process, very, very complex process, in part because asking questions about policing is difficult to do. So if you ask Rochesterians right now, do you want more police officers? I promise you, the vast majority of Rochesterians would say yes, right? Vast majority would say yes. That's in part because if you go to many neighborhoods in Rochester, you can't get a police officer to get over there, right? You can call 911, but unless it's like a murder, they aren't showing up, right? And if you ask police why, it's because they don't have enough resources, there's too much going on, et cetera. But what it means is that for many people in the city, even though I show you that figure, Rochester is twice as policed as the average city our size, you say that particularly to people in the city who are demanding services from the government, and they're shocked. We have twice as many police officers and no one will pick up the phone for me. So if you ask people, do you need more police? And this is a common thing that police departments will do to resist reform, is saying, but more people want more police, right? The people support the police department. Well, if you also ask people, Do you want more social services? Do you want more education funding? They're going to say yes to all those things. So the question isn't, do people want more police? The question is, given the limited resources we have in the city of Rochester, what do people want to do with that money? And that's a harder question to answer. Right? It's a harder question to answer. But what's to say is we got to be real careful about how we gauge people's preferences on this stuff, right? Back during 2020, when the city was trying to do its policing reform initiative, what PAB did was we got testimonials. We went out to affected communities and tried to get a sample of anonymous testimonials from people. You can read them on our website. From people who've been incarcerated, people who are unhoused, Black and brown people, police officers. We got testimony from these people. And you can just read them and you can see, trying to understand what the community wants. The community is not a monolith. The community wants a bunch of different things, right? And that makes our job even harder. But what it means is that we have to have a long-term, nuanced, expertise-driven way of gathering this information, rather than doing what most cities do, which is you have like a survey and then you say, this is what the community wants, right? Part of the reason PAB needs this budget, needs this staff, is that it's going to take time and resources to actually transform our system. Yeah, every mayor who comes into office, no matter how well-intentioned, has the idea that they're going to fix things in like 2 or 3 years. And, you know, I got to be realistic. It's going to take time. We will deliver change in the coming years, but fundamental stuff, this policing thing's been around for 100 years. It's not going away in a couple. So judging what the community wants, that's going to take time too.
Thank you. Then we have another question. John Thomas would like to know when PAB will go regional.
It's actually, I was serving on the New York State Bar Association's task force on racial justice. And this came up because most communities aren't of the size to get a $5 million PAB, right? And it turns out that the majority of police officers in New York State are in those kind of communities. They aren't in cities like Rochester. So, you know, regionally, ideas of a regional PAB are interesting. Part of the difficulty is, how do you make sure those entities are truly connected to the community? Because I promise you, if we had a PAB that covered all of Monroe County, its priorities and its staff, and you know, it would look very different. If you look at my board right now, it's exceptionally representative of the city of Rochester. It's not representative of the county of Monroe, right? And I promise you that if PAB has some success, people in the suburbs are going to be saying, well, wait a second, the Grease police force needs some. I mean, I think we all know the Grease police force could use some accountability right now. Good gosh. I actually grew up with Mike Wood's son, the new chief. So Mike's a good guy. So, but you know, when will PAB go regional? Let's make it a success at the city level first. That is, you know, is my mission, because so many of these things fail. It's my mission to make it a success in the system it is right now. And hopefully that will spur regional initiatives.
Thank you. Steve Jaros would like to know, what degree of support and encouragement have you gotten from the incoming city administration?
The Police Accountability Board Alliance, like I said, it's a coalition of community organizations dedicated to supporting PAB. They're a very smart group of people. One of the things they did during the mayoral primary, before maybe it was clear what the results were going to be, they invited both candidates to a forum. Only Councilmember Evans, then Councilmember Evans, showed up. Malik spoke for an hour on record about all the ways that he was going to support PAB. That's a, you know, I've listened to that thing a couple of times with a big smile on my face. You know, because when people make public commitments like that, it's a little bit easier to hold them to it. What I will say about this, because I know Malik, I think Malik has really cares about this city, really does, and is going to try his darndest to make it better. What I will say is this. Imagine you come into an organization that's 3,000 people strong, and 1/3 of that organization is the most powerful entity you could imagine, with its own separate culture, its own rules, its own regulation. It's exceptionally powerful politically. And you come into office, and in theory, you're supposed to be able to control that thing. But in reality, all of those employees are exceptional. They go through a culture, they have their own mission, and they don't know you, they don't respect you. And if anything goes wrong in the city in terms of public safety, and it's because maybe of some change you've made, you're going to get blamed for it. Now, what are your incentives around your ability to change that force? I remember one mayor of Rochester sat down with me when I started, and he told me a story of the first time they were on the job. It was the day after they got, I think within the first week of getting elected, there was a shooting. Some off-duty police officer shot someone in a bar, and it was the middle of the night. They got a call, and they drove to the scene. It was turning morning at that point, and they knew, because there was media all around the bar. They walked in and they knew that they were going to have to come out and say if they believed the police officer's story or not, right? And that would set the tone for their administration about the relationships with the police. And what did they do? They walked inside, listened, came out and said, I believe the police officers did the right thing. Now, that's not to say anything about that specific circumstance, but what it means is that every mayor knows there's an immense amount of political pressure on you in your relationship with the police department. And that's part of the reason why the PAB is so important. There are structural and political reasons why even the most well-intentioned reformers have a hard time changing the scene. What Rochester has done is institutionalize change in a way that separates it from some of, not all, but some of those structural forces. And that's why hopefully we can have some hope for real change. And again, I think we should all be crossing our fingers for Mayor Evans. I think we should all really should. But I think we should also hope that the broader system and the broader set of tools, including and especially PAB, can do the work. And that's why it's so important that we continue to support as a community this community-led organization.
So to that idea, I mean, many of us are white living in the suburbs. How or where will our advocacy be most effective, in your opinion?
You know, many of you are, because this is actually, I was just talking about this with a new council member. And what they say is, the things I care about most are the people who are most affected, right? And I know there's actually one longstanding council member who has a habit of, if you email them and your email message knows in some way that you're from the suburbs, they will just reply to you, you should direct this inquiry to your representative in the county, right? And someone you might not suspect either that they do that. What I would say is that your voices are most important when they are behind those of directly affected communities. So continuing to provide your financial, political, organizational support to those groups is very effective. Now, that being said, I remember I spoke at the Genesee Valley Club with Shawnee Wilson back during March or April. And the most of the people in that room were suburbanites, right? And I remember what we said at the time was, look, because actually then council member Evans was in the room. We said, look, we all know that you text with city council members. We know that you're friends with these people. You go to church or whatever with them, whatever. Tell these people personally, use your personal relationships. Hey, support the PAB, right? Support police accountability. Do the right thing. Because that, I'll tell you, that makes a difference. That makes a real difference. Right? Please don't harass people. Please don't do that. But what I have to say is that we all, in one way or another, are deeply privileged people, right? And if we can use some of that privilege and power, just a little bit, to leverage for change, because people out there who are getting absolutely killed by the system, they don't have that power. They don't have that connection. And man, if they did, they would sure be using it. So if we can, that would be exceptionally powerful.
Thank you. So we do have time for one or two more questions. Does anybody want to raise their hand real time and ask a question?
Yes, this is a little specific, but Conor, what is your feeling about qualified immunity?
I worked at the federal judiciary for a while, and I worked on QI cases. the judge I worked for, Carlton Wayne Reeves, the Honorable Carlton Wayne Reeves, wrote an opinion named Jameson v. McClendon. I would encourage that you read it. Jameson v. McClendon. I might put a link to it in the chat. Qualified immunity is a huge barrier to police accountability, because what it means is that, look, if you or I go out and punch somebody, cause someone to slip and fall or something, it's America. We know we're going to get sued, right? We know we're going to get sued. And at the end of the day, we have an insurance system that covers that and all that kind of stuff. But what it means is that the threat of legal accountability, civil accountability, not the criminal justice system, but the civil accountability system, torts for anyone who went to law school, that changes our behavior and it changes the systems that shape our behavior. Because of qualified immunity, that incentive is not available in the policing context. Here's the thing. This is what I tell lots of people. If you want a city, any of you work for city government or state government, what talks? Money. Okay. What is the city of Rochester's law department worried about? What was it worried about in the Daniel Prude investigation? Go read some of the transcripts. Money. Money. If the city of Rochester knows that the actions of its police force are going to cost it money, reform's going to happen overnight. Reform's going to happen overnight. Right now, it doesn't have to pay. There's actually a researcher who just did a master's degree at RIT on what the city pays people who are injured by police officers, because the city will settle things, right? Go look up what the price of a police officer breaking your arm is. Go look it up. There's a number for it. And you will know all you need to know about police accountability in Rochester knowing that number. Pennies. Not literal pennies, but it's almost pennies. Something that I'm very interested in the Police Accountability Board doing, and I don't know if we could do this, this is something I'm really trying to think about, is if the Police Accountability Board could say, in the context of an injury, what the city should pay. I'll be very interested to know, right? Be very interested to know. Because right now, so much of the conversation's caught up in punishing an individual police officer. Was he bad? Should he be fired so he loses his job? That's all up to him. That position's going to get replaced. But the policies, procedures, practices that created that system, that's still there. But if money is the issue, if it's money, that's not coming from that. That's going to change the department's approach. That's what I have to say about qualified immunity.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take the last question from Jay. Go ahead, unmute yourself. No, Jay? Okay. Well,
Okay. Hi. I this is not so much just question and a comment. You said that qualified immunity is a big problem. My understanding of qualified immunity is that it's there for certain cases that are not always very clear. And once a ruling is made on that particular kind of case, there's no longer qualified immunity for anyone. In other words, once a case has been settled in court, then for a particular kind of procedure, then the police are on notice that if any police officer does that particular thing again, they will not have qualified immunity. Is that the case or is that not?
In theory, it's the case. In practice, the problem is this. It's a problem called the appropriate level of generality. The appropriate level of generality, okay? If I, and this is how specific it can get sometimes. I know, right? The law says that I'm not allowed to torture you in a jail, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, if I say withhold food and water from you for 3 days, well, it wasn't clearly established at the time that I did that it was torture. No court had specifically said that was torture. So I get away with it, right? And the thing is that in that case, yeah, sure, that might establish that 3 days was torture. But what if you only do it for 2 days? Well, that wasn't clearly established either. So you'd still be able to get away with that. The problem is this level of generality. right? And the problem is that in so many cases, the level of generality is interpreted to be high enough to allow the officers to have believed that what they were doing was reasonably within the law. And trust me, as someone who's did like 10 qualified immunity cases, you get killed on this. It's almost impossible to say something's clearly established because the higher courts have said it has to be so specific, so specific. And the reality is, and I'll end on this, the idea of qualified immunity in courts, it's this idea of constitutional policing. It's the idea that police accountability happens because courts are creating law that constrains police officer behavior. Go to a police officer and ask them to quote the various cases that establish whether or not the thing is legal or not. You know the huge corpus of cases, the thousands of cases establishing what the boundaries of legally acceptable or not? Do police officers read that? No. No.
Yes, but if they don't read it and it's up to them, then they can still be charged with that.
They can
No?
still be charged, but the point is that this idea of having faraway courts define the boundaries of what is acceptable or unacceptable policing is not just a way that can be, it's not just a way to allow things like qualified immunity, which is a judicially constructed doctrine, to really say whether or not police reform will happen. It's also a way to have police reform be very abstracted from the people who it affects the most, right? Because judges, well, even in America, black judges like the one I work for get pulled over all the time by police officers. But for the most part, judges in America aren't the people being affected by policing. And so it's so important to have PABs because at the end of the day, frankly, I'm executing the wishes of 9 members of the Rochester community and what they want to see. And they want to see what this broader community wants out of police reform. And so, yes, we need to fix qualified immunity. But at the end of the day, what we need is community saying what they want out of their public safety systems. That's the most important thing. So yes, qualified immunity is important and we can talk about, I do think it will be an important change. But at the end of the day, I want to see change come from agencies like the PAB rather than necessarily the courts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Conor, thank you so much for the presentation tonight. It was really enlightening. And thank you all for your presence. And thank you, Lindsay, for doing our tech. I want to let you know that our last presentation will be on January 24th, and it is indeed Reimagining Policing with Danielle Ponder. She gave an amazing talk on this that I heard at Surge, Standing Up for Racial Justice. So I encourage you to come. She's an amazing speaker. And thank you, everybody. Thanks, Conor.